Thank you, and welcome everyone. Um, Good afternoon or morning, depending on where you're located. My name is Jason Olive, and I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program as the National Fish Habitat Partnership, or NFHP, coordinator. I would like to welcome everyone to today's webinar that is being hosted by the National Fish Habitat Board, and give a brief introduction of our presenter, Christopher Estes. This presentation was first given at the board's meeting last December, and following the presentation, the board asked Christopher to give it again in a format where it could be recorded and placed on the NFHP YouTube channel so that it can be referenced from now on. And we will provide a link to that YouTube channel in the chat. So as mentioned earlier, we are recording today's presentation. A couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our speaker. Please keep your mics on mute, and it would be helpful if we all keep our cameras off during the presentation as well. If you have questions as the presentation goes along, please feel free to put those in the chat, and I will read them for Christopher at the end. And after the presentation ends, if you would like to ask a question, you may still put it in the chat, or you can use the hand raise function on Teams and you will be called on. If there are any questions that we don't get to in time, Christopher has offered to address those by email. So again, welcome, we're glad you're here, and we expect that you will benefit from hearing what Christopher has to say. And so to introduce our speaker, Christopher Estes. He's a familiar name to many of you, but for those who don't know him, I want to give a little introduction about his connection with NFHP. A full rundown of his bio and accomplishments would take up much of our time here today. Christopher is an aquatic resources and habitat scientist with Chalkboard Enterprises, LLC, focusing primarily on in-stream flow and water level conservation issues. He also serves on the NFHP Science and Data Committee. Christopher served as the chief of Alaska Fish and Game's statewide aquatic resources coordination unit, pioneering much of the in-stream flow and water level conservation work in that agency and indeed across North America. He was one of the founders of the In-Stream Flow Council and still serves as a director at large. Relative to NFHP, following the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, or AFWA, following their creation of the National Fish Habitat Initiative in 2003, Christopher was selected to serve on a detail at AFWA with support from his agency, the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, as the national coordinator for the core working group that developed the original National Fish Habitat Action Plan that was approved in 2006 by the Department of Interior, Department of Commerce, and AFWA, which kicked off the enterprise we know today as NFHP. Christopher then served for 4 years as staff to the NFHP board on behalf of AFWA, working with several federal and state agency staff to get the program off the ground. Following his retirement from Alaska Fish and Game, Christopher has remained involved in supporting NFHP in various ways. Former NFHP board chairman Ed Shriver of Idaho referred to Christopher as the conscience of NFHP. In recognition of his career dedication and achievements related to fish habitat conservation, in 2021, Christopher was awarded the Stan Moberly Award for Outstanding Contributions in Fish Habitat Conservation, which is jointly sponsored by the American Fishery Society, NFHP, and NOAA. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce to you Christopher Estes to give an overview of the original vision and the history of the National Fish Habitat Partnership. You're up, Christopher.
Thank you, Jason. Let me get myself going here. So first of all, thank you for the introduction and for everybody that's taking the time to participate today. I'll do my best to live up to expectations by the board that asked me to repeat this talk. And I look forward to you all becoming more familiar with the partnership that, for those of you who especially were previously unaware. Although I do know and saw that a lot of folks are already familiar, but I saw some faces that aren't and names. So it's been 24 years approximately since this whole idea came about. And these are the topics I'm going to highlight today and bring to your attention, and hopefully provide a little bit ability for you to even be all more effective and more engaged. And I always want to remind everybody that you can be involved by just participating and observing what the board does, sit in on their meetings, or you can participate in all the partnership meetings, and you can either be at one time or another on their steering committees or their partners, or just simply engaged in their various activities and support them through various opportunities are provided throughout the partnership. So the goal here is to compensate for losses of institutional history and losses of institutional knowledge. And, you know, I'm only one of several hundred people that all help put this together nationwide, and then the variety of partners throughout the NGO, governmental, non-governmental sectors, academic, and so on, and just private citizens. And so there may be other folks with other perspectives, but I'm going to give you my observations over the past 24 years. And sometimes I also refer to this as institutional Alzheimer's that we're trying to mitigate for, or institutional lobotomy. So why was NFHP formed, or the National Fish Habitat Partnership? Well, there was this is back in the early 2000s, around 2000. It was observed, especially highlighted by the Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council, that there were significant declines in the quantity and quality of aquatic habitats required to sustain productivity of fish and aquatic organisms. And that was in the freshwater, estuarine, and marine habitats nationwide. And so as a result of that problem that was identified, it was also noted that there was billions of dollars plus being spent on trying to mitigate habitat degradation. And despite that, and all the money being spent, it was still a negative trajectory across various boundaries and jurisdictions. So the Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council hosted nationwide stakeholder meetings throughout the country to better define the scope of the problems and to seek options for solving them. And that was over a 2-year period. And so this is a very, very public process that was used, that the Sport Fish Boating Partnership Council engaged everyone in to see what we can do or what we might do. And so the results were that they identified we have a silo dilemma in this country. We're a reactive society, and these problems relate to insufficient multi-jurisdictional coordination awareness, along with redundancies to implement the conservation programs and actions using existing dollars. And that's at a watershed, landscape scale, and species range, habitat types, etc. And again, as I was alluding, it's national, regional, local, and all these different stakeholders in the second bullet. And then sometimes within the same organization, or if you're in a super organization, it might be subsets of your organization doesn't even know what's going on with other parts of the organization. And this is illustrated in the next slide, or at least I tried to do that. And so this is a conceptual watershed where if you look at the different colored dots, and then the very bottom is the estuarine marine environment where the purple dot is. These different dots throughout the watershed may represent different entities, or they could be all from the same entity, and they're all doing projects, but 9 times out of 10, they don't know what the other one is doing and how they all relate. And that's what this problem was that the Sportfish Boating Partnership Council meetings defined. And so that's what our challenge is, lack of coordination. And so what can we do about that? So the remedy was to develop and implement a National Fish Habitat Action Plan and mimic the successful 1980s North American Waterfowl Management Plan model and the resulting North American Wetlands Conservation Act to conserve waterfowl habitat and populations through coordinated actions. And I want to give a shout out to Gary Myers, the former executive director of the Tennessee Resources Agency, for his assistance related to the NACA lessons learned. And I apologize, I forgot to get rid of one of the little notes that kept flashing on this slideshow. So sorry about that. So the resulting actions were, as Jason alluded to in his opening, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, Fisheries and Water Resources Policy Committee, which, by the way, is the staff to that is Ali Schwab, in case any of you don't know her, established the National Fish Habitat Initiative core work group to take the lead in crafting a National Fish Habitat Action Plan. And that was all in 2004. And I provided links within the slideshow for folks that want to go right to documents such as this when you have your own copy, or if you go online to the YouTube site. But I believe Ryan will also be able to provide you copies of this PowerPoint. So the core work group also applied for and obtained a multi-state conservation grant to fund the plan development by the work group and to support pilot on the ground habitat conservation projects. And that was about $2 million over 2004 and 5. And I want to take a little sidestep and point out that conservation, as we define it in the National Fish Habitat Partnership, is to protect, restore, and enhance all three. And it's very important because all three are what it takes to conserve. And as my colleague, Gary Whalen, who's head of the Science and Data Committee with other folks, co-chairing that with Daniel Weefrey, Gary likes to say rehabilitate instead of restore. So there were many related actions going on at the same time as this solution was being sought. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation partnered with Bass Pro, and they pledged funds to align grant making to support the National Fish Habitat Partnership development. And they emphasized this needed to be a on-the-ground, science-based, coordinated, innovative fish habitat conservation approach with priorities. The Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership Council also collaborated with a variety of industry, governmental, and non-governmental groups, as well as other stakeholders that were in their meetings across the country, to establish a partnership coalition. And at that time, it was about 300 plus. And today, years later, it's about 1,500 partners. And altogether, these partners also supported the development, review, and implementation and input into the development of the action plan. And again, I have links to where you can see more of these details that are in the 2006 plan if you go to the website and download it. So other actions were that it became clear that regional landscape-based fish habitat partnerships were the key to this, taking the ideas from the other model, and they began to emerge. And the first 5 were Southeast Aquatic Resources Partnership, some of you call it SARP, Eastern Brook Trout, EBT, joint venture, EBT JV, the Western Native Trout Initiative, the WNT, the Reservoir Fish Habitat Partnership, HP, and the Matanuska-Susitna Basin Salmon Habitat Partnership, also called MATSU Partnership. So at the same time, other funding was found, supported by federal partners, and this isn't all of it, but these were the key ones: U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, United States Geological Survey, NOAA, the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, and others. 19 federal agencies headed by the Fish and Wildlife Service, formerly the Federal Caucus, called the Federal Caucus, which is now called the Interagency Operational Plan after the passage of the Enabling Act in 2020 to codify the National Fish Habitat Action Plan. Well, anyway, the Federal Caucus was developed as part of the action plan, spearheaded by the service, to coordinate federal efforts to support development and implementation of the National Fish Habitat Partnership and achieve more cost-effective implementation of related federal programs and improved outcomes. And it applies to multiple agencies as well as within an agency. And if you go back to that watershed slide, it's to tackle that lack of coordination just within the federal family of agencies. But this concept applies to everybody that's involved in National Fish Habitat Partnership, which I'll probably refer to several times. And the section of the law that got passed in 2020 is also in the footnote and discussed throughout this PowerPoint as well. So the next thing that happened was the website was formed as part of this developmental phase as an initial communication tool, and it was very primitive and rudimentary at the beginning, but if you go to it now, you'll find it's quite robust and a truly key resource for you all to learn more about what's going on and keep track of what's happening with the partnership, as well as with their other social media activities, which are all headed by Ryan Roberts at AFWA. So NFHP was completed by the core work group. And again, this was after hundreds of folks from around the country, all these different stakeholders that all had input into it, collaborating with the core work group and reviewing their drafts at various stages and so on. And it was approved for implementation by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies in March of 2024, 2006. And then in April, a month later, it was formally endorsed by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies in concert with the Secretary of the Interior and the Secretary of Commerce, or the Department of Interior and Department of Commerce. And a key endorsement letter was crafted by those signatories. And this is a picture, which I also showed in a thumbnail of the prior slide, of the National Fish Habitat Action Plan cover, but inside it is this letter of endorsement. And I really believe it's really critical for all of you that really care about how and why the National Fish Habitat Partnership was formed and what it wants to accomplish is all captured in this plan. But this letter is really, really critical to that. And here you can see these key players that all signed on it. And the next slides just have a few highlights. So that I wanted to emphasize. So this is certainly not the full letter, and it certainly does not substitute for reading the full plan, which I highly recommend you all do at some point in time. But this, you can see that the plan was to better protect, restore, and enhance fish habitat through partnerships that foster conservation and improve the quality of life for the American people. Again, these are the highlights of the topics, which all go back to that original stakeholder group effort that the Sport Fish and Boating Partnership Council all spearheaded. And this is a voluntary, non-regulatory effort or initiative and program that is carefully wrought nationwide to harness everybody to or together in the same direction. It doesn't mean that everybody has to be in the same organization, but it means that they coordinate with one another. And that again is the heart of that concept of the interagency operational plan that targets federal agency, but again, it applies to everybody that participates in this partnership. So other things about the letter. This was that it actually did emphasize this federal caucus concept, which again is now called the Interagency Operational Plan in the law. So what was the vision in the plan? Well, this is it. Healthy habitats, healthy fish, healthy people, and healthy economies will be achieved through cooperation, investment, and stewardship resulting in local actions that yield measurable social, economic, and ecological benefits and more fish. So what happened after the plan was completed? Well, the board staff were established and they were supplied by the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA, and the USGS. The first board meeting after a board was formed was September 2006, and that board was formed in between the summer, was formed, as I mentioned, in the summer, in the spring, well, the spring and summer of 2006. So they first met in September 2006 in Colorado. A charter was crafted by the board as one of its first efforts. And over time, 20 fish habitat partnerships have been formed that exist today. There was a science and data assessment that was completed, and that was spearheaded by the science and data team headed by Gary Whalen, initially Doug Beard, and now there have been others, and the current person on the heading it, it's still Gary, but now Daniel Weefrey. But there are other people that also had led that effort as well. But Through the Fish's Eye was the first assessments of how we're doing with this fish habitat conservation effort that we're all hoping to achieve. Then there was a second edition of the National Fish Habitat Action Plan that was developed because it was felt that there needed to be some updates, and I'll talk more about that in a minute or two. And then over time, there were multiple efforts to pass the enabling legislation between 2005 to 2020. And as most of you know, in October 2020, the law that codified the National Fish Habitat Action Plan, PL 116-188 Title II, was actually passed. And then in that law, another almost 5 years have passed since then. There's a provision that they have to go back and get reauthorization of funding and do any fine tuning. And that process is currently in progressing right now in Congress. In fact, the Senate just approved the updated budget with some improvements. And now we hope the House will do the same in the next coming months with the signature of the president. So stay tuned about that. So there were also other side efforts before the law was passed to develop and pass an executive order, but the board felt that that was no longer a prudent effort to pursue. And so that effort, although it was initiated at one time, was abandoned. So I mentioned there was a 2012 plan completed, and I want to highlight a few things because some people are confused by it. It does not replace the 2006 plan, it supplements it. So it's really important to read the full original 2006 plan and use this plan to capture some updates. And I put in a couple bullets some of the things that it to highlight that are updates that are really critical. And so one of those is that it includes a memorandum of understanding by the Departments of Interior, Agriculture, and NOAA to further emphasize that they are still actively supporting the original endorsements from the 06 plan, because there were a lot of other initiatives going on that appeared that maybe not everybody was remembering what had happened in 2006. So that was a really important document. And it also further emphasizes the elements of what are critical about this federal caucus and what is now called the Interagency Operational Plan. And again, where you can see all that is included in this slide. So this matrix is an updated version from the 2006 plan that's in the 2012 plan that gives you an example of just how agencies that participated in the federal caucus at this time, and now there are more thanks to the efforts of Jason Olive spearheading an update of all this as part of the interagency operational plan requirements in the law. And this matrix, which will be expanded, just shows you the examples of the types of funding and programs and information that are all integrated and being worked on and funded by just the family of federal agencies. And then if you expand this to include this to all the other types of partners, you can see we're going back to that watershed picture. If we can all at least be not take over who does what, but let each other know what we're all doing and who's doing it, we can be more effective, as was envisioned and suggested by the Sport Fishing and Boating Partnership, as well as embodied in the action plan. So, as I alluded, the Fish and Wildlife Service is the lead of this effort, and this is now being spearheaded by the service through Jason Olive. And I'm just repeating here what I told you about it, except that it is required to be updated every 5 years. And the first one was produced as a result of the law that passed in 2020, and the first one was produced in 2021. And now Jason is overseeing updating it again to meet the 5-year requirement. So here are some of my reflections. The primary challenge for the National Fish Habitat Partnership is to know its origins and past, as well as to tie those and bridge those with where it's going in the future. Remember that partnership is still in its infancy. We only have about 24 years of history, evolution, and it's still maturing. The 2020 enabling legislation is only 4 years old, and it's going through and it's proven, as did the original action plan, which basically operated for 14 years with duct tape and baling wire to keep it going until it was codified in 2020. This is all new, and the enabling legislation is only 4 years old, and it's still fully being explored. And as I said, there's some tweaks that are going to be hopefully passed in this Congress that'll even improve it further. But even if they're not, this whole effort has lasted 14 years before it even became codified. And that doesn't include the efforts that the Sport Fish Boating and Partnership did before that for a couple of years. Like everything else, the partnership is subject to passage of time that can result in losses of institutional history and knowledge, as I pointed out at the beginning, which is why the board asked me to give this presentation, because not only has there been a different transition of who's all participating in this partnership, some people are no longer with us, sadly, and gone on to other types of activities, and not everybody paid attention to everything that was going on. So and we've had a lot of turnover in board members, and kudos to everybody that's ever participated in this and their contributions. And recently, as noted several board meetings ago, which I mentioned in December, Chair Robert Boyles pointed out, the National Fish Habitat Action Plan, don't forget, it's our Constitution. And the law that was passed in 2020 is the resulting law. But you don't just change a constitution. If you do amend it and you do revise it, you're very careful about that. But your laws can be modified, which is what we're doing. And the law is based on the Constitution and better defining it, or dealing with road bumps that might be in it, or other unforeseen situations that will improve upon what was envisioned in the Constitution, but not reinvent the wheel. There are no substitutes, and I can't emphasize this enough, for carefully reading the 2006 and the 2012 NFHP editions, as well as the law, and see how the law dovetails into those and relates to those. The partnership was never intended for anyone who has an assembly line mentality or wants to be on a production line, and for those who promote working in silos and do not like to coordinate with one another and take the time to do so. It's about improving the wheel, not reinventing it. It's really important also, as I observed, that everybody in the partnership should be all looking inward and externally to assess and clarify the NFHP related roles, expectations, and capacities of the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and its regional associations that partner with it, because that is the organization that triggered the effort that led to taking what the Sport Fish Boating and Partnership Council came up with as a problem and made a solution for it and brought the solution forward, which is the partnership today. And the association has been critical and pivotal and the hub of all this, but over time it's had institutional history and knowledge losses, or institutional Alzheimer and lobotomy, and it too needs refreshing what its roles are. None of us are immune from that. It's also important to periodically assess and clarify the partnership, all partnership participants' related roles, expectations of them, and their capacities. And I add that it's everyone, because a lot of the law focuses on partnerships meeting this standard, but it really applies to the board as well, and also to partners and each board member. And so as part of that, we want to, and I think should, whether we're required to or not, assess the performance by and contributions from all the partnerships, and not just participants, and not just the fish habitat partnerships. We're all in this together. This doesn't work if we're not all doing our own part. And remember, this is a bottom-up process. It's state-driven with all these other partners. It's also important to facilitate improved NFHP networking, including the capacity. That means providing adequate resources to do so. And this updated reauthorization is a step forward towards that if it goes through as envisioned. Again, I'm going to come back to this federal caucus, which again it is targeted on the federal folks, but it applies to everybody. And the concept is universal. We need to fully implement it, and Jason Olive is doing an awesome job getting us there, as were his predecessors that did it through NFHP. And that was Tom Buzan that led that effort originally. It's really important to fully implement the NFHP scientific and technical support provisions, which are in the law, and they provide a special $2 million authorization for federal agencies to provide technical and scientific support, plus the ability to pass through money to states to provide technical and scientific support. And even though that provision is in there during this first 4 years, not all of that money has been actually taken advantage of. And so I'm recommending we work hard to do that. In the law, there is a provision that talks about 2 of the 26 member board, and I believe it's going to be expanded under the new law, a couple seats or more. The reason there are 2 tribal seats is that in the lower 48, there's one form of governance for tribes in the United States, and in Alaska, where half the nation's recognized tribes are as well, there's another form of governance. And so the action plan folks and those that crafted the original legislation felt it was really important to have at least representation from those 2 forms of tribal government. And there may be another that relates to the Hawaiian considerations in culture. Water conservation elements. It's really important. If there's inadequate amounts of clean water and no connectivity, there will be no fish. So there are elements in the law that make it very clear and provide voluntary mechanisms to make sure that there are conservation actions that can be taken to ensure that there'd be adequate amounts of clean water in rivers, lakes, and reservoirs and connected water bodies. And so that's why there's water conservation elements in this law. And there was a lot of effort to take those elements out, and they had to constantly put in there, and they're there. And the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies at one of its annual meetings actually had a special presentation on just this topic for its members. One thing that happened with this speeding train over the 24 years is that when the law passed in 2020, we were in the midst of COVID impacts. And so there was really never a formal celebration that was held when the law was passed that even recognized all the people, and we're talking hundreds of people that contributed from the Sport Fish Boating Partnership Council era to the National Fish Habitat Initiative era to the original board and the boards that have existed since, and members and all the fish habitat partnership folks that have participated in these partnerships, including their coordinators and so on, and their steering committees, and then the various partners. There's never been possible to have formal recognition of the folks that got us to where we are today. And so maybe it might be worth considering that at the 20th anniversary of the endorsement of the original action plan, maybe that's a time in 2026 to maybe bring people together that still have an interest and deserve to be recognized for getting us to where we are today. And maybe they have some things that they can add that are going to be much better than what I'm providing you today, even give you other ideas to further improve upon it. And then I want to really reemphasize that the partnership was created, going back to that watershed figure, and the issues that the Sport Fish Boating Partnership and Council stakeholder meetings pointed out, is to facilitate and support improved cost-effective coordination of all relevant federal, state, local, tribal, NGO, private, etc., academic, habitat conservation programs and actions at local, regional, and national scales, and including the conservation projects to protect, restore, and enhance freshwater, estuarine, and marine habitats by NFHP that are administered by the Fish Habitat Partnerships on a science-based landscape voluntary conservation approach. And then there are no NFHP implementation silver bullets. Sorry, there's no shortcuts here. If there were, we wouldn't need an NFHP. If there were, there wouldn't have been the Sport Fish Boating and Partnership Council stakeholder meetings. A lot of people, this is going to be a forever effort. It'll never be perfect. It'll never be nirvana. But in my opinion, why do I participate? Because it's the best thing I've ever been involved in my career, which is almost 50 years long now. And to me, this is one of the few things, there are others, but this is one of the few things that I think is making a difference. So I find it personally rewarding, selfishly rewarding, and I believe it's making a difference. And I hope you all feel the same. So a couple recaps. There's a toolbox here: the action plans, the law, the board, the staff, the partnerships, and the partners, and the website, which is at the very bottom here. Explore it. It has the history. It has content. If you find things that you think aren't clear, or you can't find them, or you have recommendations, send those to Ryan Roberts. He runs that website. This is a recap of the 20 partnerships, which most of you are already familiar with, so I'm not going to spend time on it. Again, the mission: to protect, restore, and enhance the nation's fish and aquatic communities through the 20 partnerships that currently exist to foster fish habitat conservation, that's protection, restoration, and enhancement, and improve the quality of life for the American people. It's based on implementing voluntary, non-regulatory landscape scale fisheries conservation. Again, protection, restoration, and enhancement using the best available science. It's based on leveraging federal and privately raised funds and actions to build partnerships and coordinate them. And as I mentioned, the original coalition of partners that were coordinating in the developmental phase of the action plan was a couple hundred. Now it's 1,500 plus agencies, and there's thousands more that could be integrated. So thanks to the NFHP board, staff to the board, Fish Habitat Partnerships, their coordinators and their partners, including all the past founders, board members, Fish Habitat coordinators, and partners, as I just alluded. And thanks for letting me share these thoughts with you. And now, if you have any questions, I'm open for those. And I think we have about 15 minutes or so.
Okay, if anyone has any questions for Christopher, you can raise your hand or type them in the chat. See, Rick Jacobson has his hand up. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, Rick Jacobson has his hand up because he's not smart enough to keep it down. Topher, great presentation. Way to revisit the history of NFHP. Thank you so much for that.
Oh, thank you, Rick.
I do have two questions for you. One is at its conceptualization and initiation, how was the work of NFHP funded? Where did that funding come from? And how did that funding model shift over time? And last among that is, what were the implications of those shifts in funding, both for the partnerships as well as for the agencies involved? That's one question. The other question is, if you look across all of the fish habitat partnerships over the first 24 years, and because of the similarities, you look across all of the joint ventures, migratory bird joint ventures across the country, and you look at those that have been more successful and those that have been less, and try to identify the drivers of those fish habitat partnerships and joint ventures that have been more successful than others. What are the lessons to be learned there? And how can we capitalize on the drivers of those successes and replicate them across the country?
Boy, two great and difficult questions to answer. But wouldn't expect anything less from you. First of all, the funding. I did point out at the beginning how the federal agencies and AFWA, well, first of all, AFWA got the original multi-state conservation grants, which it was able to secure successfully before the action plan was completed and after the action plan was completed, as well as to help implement the effort post the completion of the original action plan, as well as the several of the federal family agencies with the Fish and Wildlife Service doing the heaviest lifting of all, supporting it in terms of its funding. And as I referred to it as duct tape and baling wire, since there was no actual formal law in place that as opposed to the action plan and an endorsement by the various agencies. And then there was also the private sector that contributed funding. And again, Sportfish Boating and Partnership Council helped with that. And so money came from a variety of sources, and everybody going back to that original action plan, the memorandum that was developed in 2012 and the continuation of the board, just kept finding resources that they could legally share without having a formal program anywhere to fund this effort. But the important thing was everybody believed in it strongly enough, absent an actual formal codification of law, they were willing to do whatever they had to do to keep it going. And by the way, the state fish and wildlife agencies anteed up several, over $40,000 of its funds over time too, to contribute when there might be some kind of shortage. So everybody in this NFHP family, some more than others based on their ability to do so, all contributed to keep it going, if that answers your question. And then of course, many, even though the law provided some base funding, it still is only a part of all the resources that are actually being leveraged and come into this partnership from all those different groups. So the law really helped by codifying the plan, but it also provided a mechanism to make it a little easier to have base funding and not rely so much on solely the Fish and Wildlife Service doing so much of the heavy lifting, as you probably know your agency has done and which everybody appreciates. But NOAA, USGS, BLM, others have all, Forest Service have all, they may have contributed by either through direct resources or at the partnership level. Many have been very, very active on the steering committees of partnerships, as well as tying in programs that they think can be coordinated, even if they're not being administered by the partnership. So again, this is all about collaboration, coordination as envisioned in the Federal Caucus Interagency Operational Plan, and overall concept of coordinating everybody's efforts, not necessarily administering everybody's efforts by one entity. So that, I hope, answers your first question. Is that okay before I go to number 2?
Yeah, that'll be fine. We can have an offline conversation also. But
Okay,
that
well,
was
let's
fine.
do that.
Thanks.
And then secondly, the drivers. In my reflections, those are this train's been moving so fast, and because the resources have been so limited, everybody is just trying to keep up with what their highest triage priorities are, whether they be at the board level, the staff level, the partnership level, and the partners level. That these reflections about actually revisiting what are the drivers that have worked and haven't worked, those are among my recommendations that we need to take a moment or two and take a breath and try to reflect on that, to do exactly what I assume you're trying to promote. That let's figure out what's working best, what's not working so well, and what can we do to improve it. But it's really hard to do that when this initiative is so new in its infancy, and the law created a whole new wrinkle on things that we're still trying to define what all that language is. And in this reauthorization, we're trying to take some of those ideas that you're suggesting and taking some of the things we've learned and improving upon this law based on the reauthorization that's in Congress now. And there's more things we could do, but it's really hard, as you know, to keep up with the triage of the things that have to be done versus doing the things that you would like to be done. But I totally agree with you that that's something that needs to be an ongoing effort. And I hope I captured that in my reflections. How does that answer that question? And do you want to talk about that further after the meeting?
Sounds perfect. Nicely
Okay.
done.
Perfect. Wow.